So thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today with you, and it's been fun meeting everybody and getting to know people, and I'm looking forward to this conversation with you. One of the things that's interesting when you get asked to give a presentation on how you should differentiate yourself consistent with the vision of the Utah Valley University is you're proposing things that you should do, and you don't want people to think that they're doing something wrong, and yet you're supposed to propose something about the future. So I want you to know up front, both from my research before coming up here, and then also just in the conversations over the past day, that I am amazed with what you have done in the Woodbury School, with what UVU has been doing. It's and this is in a strong place, and I'm really excited about what you're doing and the possibility of being a part of it. And so in sharing what I'm going to share today, I want to share ideas and things that are just possibilities for us that we could explore together. In doing this, I'm going to ask you to indulge me in something. I was told I was supposed to give a 30-minute talk, but I want to start out, and if anybody can relate to me, it should be people in a business school. I'm going to start out with a mini case study. So please take a moment. Can you read this in the back? All right, so then I won't read it to you. Take a moment and read this little case study here, and I'm going to ask you about a question about it in a minute. Okay, now just to make sure we're really clear on this, I want to make it obvious. One solution that you cannot offer in this situation is just shave off a day, because we're 18 months behind, and you lose the money if you're 18 months behind, and so therefore if you shave off a day, we'll be fine. That is not true. You were 0 months behind at the 0 point, which means that there's a trend here. So this isn't just that we're behind. This is we are falling further and further behind all the time. We could be 22, 23 months behind when we get to the 48-month mark. So you're Kurt Wright. You're the consultant who's been hired to solve this problem. What do you do?
Ryan, who does Kurt Wright work for? Because otherwise I'll just take the money, right?
That is one response. I'm not sure I call it a solution, but it's a response. Okay, so Kurt Wright is a consultant. He's an independent consultant.
Oh, okay.
And he has been hired by this company to solve it. And it's
Things back on track.
Yes, exactly.
Was he the original contract?
Was
the
Kurt?
original contract with him? So he's been the one falling behind with these engineers?
No, this is not with him.
Trying to fix it.
He is only coming in to fix it.
Well, first you have to assess the situation. Was the project, was it an 800-person project and you try to do it with 400? Was, is there a management problem? Did you change a lot of leadership and so no one knows what they're doing? I mean, there's a lot of questions you need to start spending some time getting your hands dirty in the company to figure out what's going on.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah.
And I think after that, because basically we have, 10 months to trying to save $30 million, I guess we can get back on track.
Yep.
And maybe evaluate the situation the way of, okay, what are some resources, what are some plans that we have that can save the situation, how much more investment we need to make into maybe it's a cost-benefit analysis within that 10 months, whether to give people more compensation or more resources, that they can work faster to catch up on the schedule.
All right, excellent, thank you. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
My thought was that maybe there's some waste that's happening. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you'd have to evaluate it, but
Yeah.
you're thinking, wow, 400 engineers and you keep falling behind. Like Gene saying maybe there was supposed to be 800 engineers and there's only 400.
Or 200.
But at the same time, I'd be like, is there some waste that's happening that we could trim that waste out of the project to help it get back on track?
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, any others? David, you're coming back.
Well, with any big software project, you always worry about scope creep, right? Like this is a pretty linear trajectory. So this looks like for every month I'm going forward.
It probably isn't this linear.
But having worked on large software projects, often the goalposts are moving, and so as the goalposts move, even though I've been doing work, I'm falling further and further behind. So the issue before was if it's a manpower issue, that's essentially the external people we've hired to work on it. If it's me changing the goalposts after the fact issue, then that's a little bit on me as internal management saying, you know what, I told you I wanted to build a house and now I want a castle, or whatever.
Yeah, got it. There's one more and then I'll move on from there. Yeah.
Well, just another thought with thinking about the next 10 months. We know that there's this looming potential $30 million penalty in 10 months. We know there's a problem. We're probably not going to be able to fix it all in 10 months. So have a conversation with, maybe renegotiate the contract or allow for, listen, we know that we're off track right now, off schedule. Let's see, is there any sort of negotiation that can take place to minimize the penalties that we might be facing or extending, of course, taking into account all these other suggestions as well.
Of course, yeah.
Open the lines of communication.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. All right, now, the reason why I throw this up here at the beginning is to give an example of how we often tend to approach things when they come up of this kind of nature. So you'll notice that almost all of the comments that were made involved analysis, right? Evaluate it, assess it. Let's look at the waste. Let's look at the investment that we've put in so far. Let's look at how many people we have, all those kinds of things. That is a normal human reaction. When we do that, when there is something that's presented to us as a problem, what do you do with a problem? You solve it, right? And if you don't know the solution right off, then we do analysis so that we can understand it and solve the problem. That's not only human, that's what we teach in business schools. Almost everything we teach is analysis to solve problems as they're presented to us. Let me show you what Kurt Wright actually did in this situation. Now, everybody loves a good Disney ending to a story, but this one begs some questions, I think. One of the things that's interesting about this is this wasn't just a technical problem. When he went out and started asking those questions in the hallway, their reaction was anger. That alone is interesting. All he's doing is walking around the hallways. Why be so angry? Well, because we hired a consultant, like you're supposed to tell us the answer, and instead he goes around asking us questions, right? That's the point of having a consultant then. And was he accusing us of doing a bad job and whatever else? You can start to imagine that. So if it's not just a technical problem, it's also a social and psychological problem because these people are angry. Then the next big question becomes, how did they get from there to the end point? I like to imagine it like this. I'm an engineer working in this company, and I'm stressed out of my mind because we're gonna lose $30 million, and guess what happens to my job if we lose $30 million, right? And so I'm pretty stressed. I'm walking down the hallway and Kurt Wright comes walking up to me and he says, what would it take for us to finish this project a week early? And I'm like, dude, get out of my face, right? And I just can't even believe he's asking me this question. So the rest of the day I'm grumbling. I go to my colleague, can you believe this guy that they hired? This is the kind of thing management would do. We're losing money and they pay a consultant, And I go home and I dinner with my wife. She's like, how was work today? And I'm like, you shouldn't believe what the management has done now with this consultant they hired. But then, after a good night's sleep, I'm in the shower the next day, because all good epiphanies happen in the shower for me. And I'm standing there in the shower, I'm like, wait a minute. What if we finished a week early? That would be so cool. And when that happens, I realize a couple of things. I realize that even though I hate this guy over in marketing, if I actually collaborated with him, we could probably solve 2 months of the project problem. And not only that, but if I actually shared my budget with this guy, even though that means actually letting people encroach on my turf, then maybe we could actually overcome another 2 weeks of problems. And you see me making these changes, and so you say, well, if he's making those changes, maybe I can make them too. And pretty soon, you have this kind of a result that you see up here. Now, I want to point out a few things about this. The first thing is that analysis is a great thing. It's a good thing we teach that in business schools. But one of the things that Robert Fritz, the author of The Path of Least Resistance, argues is that the big mistake that most people make is they don't clarify their purpose before they do the analysis. If I do the analysis of how do we not lose $30 million, I get very different results than if I do the analysis of how do we finish a week early. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is he questioned impossibility. Everybody assumed that was impossible. And yet, when you test that, it turns out that there are ways, and there were ways in this case. Now, not always. Sometimes you find out it's impossible, but you don't really know that until you test it. And then the third thing is that he tapped into what people wanted. What would an engineer want more than that opportunity to solve a problem that actually does extraordinary things and say, I did that, right? And so knowing what people want that taps into their interests is huge. And then all of those happen to have to do with purpose. The one in purple that I put there is he didn't just go tell them. He asked them. He provided the frame of the purpose, but then he let them figure it out themselves. And so as a result, he didn't have to solve the problems, nor would the consultant be the right person to solve those problems. They came from the people who owned them. They then also owned the solutions, and they were enthusiastic about it themselves because he unleashed what they already had to offer in and of themselves. So I offer this case today as a way to think about Utah Valley University Woodbury School of Business. But before I do that, let me tell a personal story about why I'm here today. So I have spent most of my career thinking the last thing I ever want to do is go into academic administration. What could be more painful and miserable than that? Especially when your day job is to be a professor and you get to teach and research on the topics you're interested in all the time. And why would you switch and instead go beat your head against the bureaucracy? It makes no sense. However, that began to change for me about 9.5 years ago when I was hired at the University of Louisville. The University of Louisville is a university that is in the city, of the city, and for the city. Sometimes the University of Louisville over its history has forgotten that and wandered in other ways, but the city is always there wanting it back. And as a city, there's all kinds of wonderful things there, and there's lots of challenges there. There's challenges in terms of distribution of wealth and socioeconomic status problems and diversity problems. And you might have seen some of them 2 years ago when Breonna Taylor was killed, and it was the same time that George Floyd was killed, and the protests that were in the streets and those kinds of issues. And there's real opportunity there, and people want the university to provide that opportunity. And so I began to meet some of these students in my classes and starting to think about the impact this could have. And then one day, I was introduced to a book by Arlen Hamilton. And Arlen Hamilton was homeless, living in the San Francisco, if I remember correctly, train station, when finally she got some money, a check that she used to start a venture capital fund, and she now runs a multi-million-dollar venture capital fund. And she wrote this book. I blocked out one of the words. You can probably guess what goes in there. But she introduced to me this idea, how to turn your being underestimated into your greatest advantage. So the first thing that intrigued me about this is normally when we talk about people like Arlen, Black, female, I believe she's also LGBTQ, right? And all the demographic categories that we normally would term as disadvantaged or underprivileged. And she rejects those words and says, no, we're not disadvantaged, underprivileged, we're underestimated. And that caught my attention and made me think about like, well, that implies a lot of interesting things. And as I thought about that, it just kind of percolated in the back of my mind. And then one day I'm walking down the hallway towards my office, and the thought occurred to me, what if the University of Louisville College of Business became the best college of business in the world at helping every student turn what makes them underestimated into their advantage, so they can become captains of industry and go out and make a big difference in the world? That was the first thought. I thought, that would be pretty exciting. And the second thought that occurred to me is, man, if that was what we were about, I actually think I would like being in academic administration. And so I went to the dean and I told him, and he thought it was a great idea, and we started like working and trying to make this happen in the school. We even tried to make it part of the vision and mission of the school. He started giving me positions in the administration of the school, and he was excited about it. I presented to the faculty. I was super nervous when I presented to the faculty because I just was waiting for everybody to tell me, you know, what was wrong about it. We're a research school, we're this, we're that, you know, what's going to happen. And to my surprise, the faculty, the staff, with a few exceptions, were actually really excited, and they liked the idea. Some of them wanted to change the wording, some of them wanted to do whatever, and I didn't care about the wording. I cared about the spirit of what we were trying to do. But that actually got me engaged, and so I started working on this in the College of Business, and started making some progress. but also started running into all kinds of obstacles. And what was interesting is they weren't obstacles of willingness. Like I said, most people were actually on board and thought it was a good idea, which, alone was surprising. But instead, it just got ignored and overlooked. And what it was is people were always busy or distracted, or there was some other crisis, or whatever else, and it just they didn't want to have this be an agenda item on the faculty meeting because we have all these other things we have to cover. And one day I sat down in a meeting where we were supposed to discuss this, and I thought of something to say that finally got people's attention. And the thing I said was, when I'm trying to work on the mission of the school, I'm not trying to change the words on our webpage. I'm trying to fundamentally change who we are. And then one of the associate deans looks at me and says, well, why didn't you say that in the first place? And I'm like, what do you think a mission is? Well, the answer to that question was obvious, right? They think it's words on a webpage. It's a marketing thing that we put out there to tell people what we're about, but we actually don't hold ourselves accountable to that. But here's the thing. If we hold ourselves accountable to a vision in a real way with discipline and substance, it actually changes the way we manage an organization. It means we lead with strategy. It means we get clear not only about what we do, but about what we don't do. Because if it's not consistent, we don't do it. Or if we do it, maybe we prioritize it differently because this is who we are. It means we can empower. It means that the deans and the directors don't have to make all the decisions, because once people adopt and make this a part of who we are as a school, then they, as a school, will make decisions, and you can trust them to make decisions because they're going to act in a way that's consistent with the vision and the mission of the school. It means you can go out and fundraise with meaning, because if this is what we're about and you can feel it, because that's how we talk about it around here, and you can see it in the actions and the evidence that we provide you about what we do, then who wouldn't want to give money to something that makes a difference in that way? It means you can be consistent in crisis. So as my colleague says, oh, we have to deal with this budget crisis. Oh, we have to deal with the pandemic. Oh, we have to deal with this. The fact is if we were managing from the vision, then you could be steady during crisis instead of being pulled every which way as the crisis, tries to draw your attention that way or this way. And you can trust people to actually deal with the issues. And finally, you can position yourself with distinction. What actually makes you different is if we became the best college of business in the world at turning the underestimated into captains of industry, that positions you, and you can stand out and draw people in the world, in your students and your recruiters and with whoever else you work with externally. But the problem is that every organization, every college of business has a vision. Very few are disciplined about their vision. And that's really the differentiator. Well, I went on, and the fact is I like being at U of L, and I'm happy to keep working there. And so when different position applications came in, I didn't pay attention to most of them, didn't even pay attention the first time the UVU one came through because I wasn't really even thinking about it. But then I actually got the application for UVU the second time, and I looked at it, and to my surprise, even though on the surface of it, you might look at the Woodbury School and the University of Louisville College of Business and say, these have nothing in common, I actually started to see a lot of things in common. This is an open access university that's transforming the lives of students, that actually contributes to the city. And so, or in this case, you might say the county or the state or whatever, but it contributes to the local geography. And there's a chance there to be embedded and to make a difference. And a lot of those things are the same things that excited me about the University of Louisville. But now, if I were to have a dean's position, then I'd have just a little bit more authority with which to say, no, we do vision with discipline, instead of trying to always persuade upward to get us to do vision with discipline. And that caught my eye and drew my attention and said, I would love to be a part of that. I would love to be at a place where we're really transforming individual lives of students and the local economy and society, but doing it in a way that's disciplined and actually allows people to be empowered with trust and do those kinds of things. And so that's why I'm here. And so the assignment was to figure out what's distinctive. Well, the fact is I actually went through and tried to do a strategic analysis. I won't show you because with the slides, but I actually had those little 2x2s where you map all the business schools and, whatever in Utah and that sort of thing. But the fact is the simple thing is I just went to the mission vision statements of Marriott, Huntsman, Eclays, and here and a couple others. And most of the language of most of them are pretty much the same, but each one has like distinguishing words. And for me, the one stood out is that we have a transformative impact on Utah's quality. We are embedded in this place. We're not trying to send people all over the world or fulfill a religious mission or whatever else. We're trying to change this place, and we're doing it for all students. We're trying to reach them in that way. That's not just idealism, that's differentiation as well. And so that's what excited me. So with that in mind, I want to go back to the case that I started with. The answers were in the people and in the system. The leader's job was just to give direction and then to ask the right questions and to help people succeed at what they already know and what they're already good at. So I don't know everything. I've done my research and tried to come up with ideas of what fit in, but if we were going to, at the Woodbury School of Business, to be world class at having this kind of impact. So already, you guys are doing these things and doing them in an amazing way. Last night at dinner, Mitch Murdoch was telling me about the marketing centers for digital marketing and how bringing in the projects wasn't working with the semester schedule, but by creating centers, now we have people and students who in 6 months are actually qualified and getting jobs. That's amazing stuff. And there's all kinds of stuff like that already going on here. And so I heard those, and I heard other ideas from people I talked to over the past couple of days. And I think that there's ways to become world class in transforming the lives. One of the things that Rachel said last night, she talked about the delta, right? And that one of the things that differentiates us, if you go to Harvard or Stanford or MIT or whatever else, that's great. You're coming from a high up place, you're going to a high up place. It's not clear that there's a lot of delta there. It's more like you're a job placement. Now, I'm exaggerating a little bit because I've been to Harvard and they do a lot of great things there, but it's not the same transformative education, right? Where the delta is what makes a difference. And if we want to be world-class, best in the world, then you got to keep improving at these things. There's so much that's learned, but there's also so much to do. So I'm going to share some ideas I've heard from you, some of my own ideas, but I don't want any of these to be like, this is what we're going to do if I come here. I want this to be like, hey, here's some ideas and let's talk about them. What's exciting to you? What works as a system from the insiders who know what they're doing? And how could we do that together? So first thing is, I think that the more we can get measures that get at things like the delta, then not only does that help us to measure, get progress, know how well we're performing, and improve that performance over time, it also gives us more direction about what this means. The very conversations that you have to engage in to create the measures help us to get clearer about what a vision like this would mean in practice for us. And so I think that there's a lot of exciting ways to think about how do you measure student quality of life or quality of life potential before they enter a business school, and what it looks like after, or in terms of their earning potential, or whatever it may be. And those are some exciting conversations that can make a difference. We can start with the traditional ones like enrollment and retention and graduation, but that doesn't really tell us the whole story. And in fact, if you create measures that are distinct and that really get at that delta, then you could publish those and make other people say, hey, why aren't we doing what the Woodbury School does, and how can we be more like them? Because now we have data to show the world that they are, how are you doing on these? Can you even tell us how you're doing on these things? Why aren't you trying to have this kind of a delta? Another thing is that if we're really disciplined about a vision, then that would mean that we ask these questions. How are we helping students from any walk of life when I design a course? When I design an individual class, not just the course, but how I'm going to deliver that class today. When I put a curricula together, when our academic advisors counsel our students, are they asking how we're going to get them ahead? Are we asking how we're going to embed ourselves more fully in the community and uplift Utah's economy and society as a result? When we make policies, when we actually decide how we're going to spend our money in any significant way, do we stop and seriously ask this and change our priorities if they're not matched? That's a practice that has to be built into the culture if it's really going to work. Other ideas, I was actually talking to a similar idea to David Benson about this, the idea that there was a book that came out last year. It's called Won't Lose This Dream. Some of you may have seen it or read it. It's about Georgia State University. Used to be one of the lowest retention schools in the country, now is one of the highest in spite of it being a city school embedded in low socioeconomic status places. And they've totally transformed it. And one of the things they found was that most students who drop out for financial problems don't do it because they can't pay the tuition. It's because they don't have the last $50 they need to pay their rent for the month and they can't get by. Little $50 grants here or there or other forms of aid could change lives and help people to finish in ways that give them the opportunity to go and make that difference in the world. And wouldn't that be attractive to a donor as a way to make huge impact for small investment? Other things. So a university is supposed to basically accomplish two missions as far as its students are concerned. One is to provide a liberal education so you're better students and taxpayers and voters, and that's kind of the general education. And then the other thing is you're supposed to prepare them for the marketplace so you can provide for yourself and your family and contribute to the economy in some way. And guess what? A college of business, a school of business, is how you turn what you know into money. Well, every student on campus needs that. And so if that's really one of the missions of a university, we ought to be the most collaborative school on campus. We should be in there helping an auto repair student know how they're going to turn what they do into money, either as their own entrepreneurial startup, my auto repair shop, or whether it's I'm going to go join and I can tell the manager, we ought to be running the business this way instead so that we can get ahead. Or whether it's an artist or a scientist or whoever it is, how are we engaged in ways that we don't only transform our own students, but we transform the whole university because we're the ones who know how to make what they know productive. We ought to be helping in that way. Unbundle and redesign. So this ties back, this is already happening. You guys are doing things around trying to develop stackable things or trying to do the centers that enable you to get people sooner. Could we put those kinds of ideas on steroids? What if we actually went out and talked to employers and found out what are the pain points that you have and what are the small clusters of classes, maybe one class that's redesigned or maybe 3 classes put together that we're already offering or whatever it is that you can then get credentialed for and you can go out and make. Now, one of the things that does is it means every time I accomplish that, a small win gets me a little bit further to my degree, but also helps me to continue surviving with the job I already have or the job I want to get next. But it also enables us to be much more flexible in what we do in providing for students in a number of ways. And so you can take those ideas and get even more radical with them. One of the ways you can get radical with them is we know that one thing that retains students is when they go through a cohort model. But that's hard to do with undergraduates because undergraduates have to do general ed and all these other things. And so how do you do that? Well, if you have micro clusters of classes that are designed to make them employable, then one of the things you can do is you put them in a cohort. And if you really want to get radical, you can say not only are you in a cohort, but nobody finishes this until everybody knows this so well that you can get an A, so that my finishing depends on your doing well. Then you could put in one of our organizational leadership faculty or somebody else as a coach and say, all right, not only are you going to be learning your financial acumen for this particular thing, but in order to learn how to get along with other people and how to lead them, you've got to learn how to deal with the difference of the fact that you know more about finance than I do, but I know more about how to get ahead in this situation. And so we help them actually develop the skills, the interpersonal skills, to succeed by giving them really tough requirements to succeed as a cohort or not at all. Or not at all. You don't leave until it's done, but everybody succeeds. On that same note, one of the things that's worrisome about these models that we're moving to where you're picking up tools and you're doing micro credentials and all those kinds of things is that we're doing horizontal development of our students. But one of the things that we find is people need vertical development. They need depth of character. They need understanding the things that a liberal education was originally supposed to provide. So what if every cluster that you put together of education has some kind of educational depth requirement as well as the functional tool requirement in it so that every student of ours is becoming a deeper and more impactful person while they're doing it. Again, none of these ideas are what I'm telling you we should do. I'm just trying to inspire conversation of what's interesting and what's exciting. If we do this, and some students don't want to go and get an education in 4 years and then be done with it, what about an education by subscription model? You pay a subscription and you come and take classes whenever you want, and you do it for 60 years until you retire or die. And it's just you become our partner as a student at the Woodbury School of Business. Is the development never ends, and our success is embedded in your success. All right? Or what about physical presence? Everybody's been talking about Silicon Slopes. David was telling me when I talked to him the other day that they were up there and there's no physical presence there. What if there was? Well, not only about that. What about at the BioHive? And what about in the manufacturing sector? If we're there, so we're top of mind with people, and we can facilitate recruitment, or we can facilitate professional development, or whatever else might be there, that's part of being embedded, and that's part of being a klutz. Another thing you can do when you break things into membership models, or when you break things up into smaller things, is we can create a membership model. So what if we then go out to corporations and we say, we want to partner with you. And in partnering with you, we can have levels of membership. So this is the standard, this is the good membership, and this is the elite membership. And you can pick and choose a package of recruitment opportunities, internship opportunities, working with the school, marketing through our alumni magazine, whatever else. And what's going to be your level of membership with us, because we now have everything in positions where we can put it together in ways that are interesting to you as a donating partner, a recruiting partner, whatever it may be with corporations. So there's a million other ideas we can do. And I think that the reason why there's a million ideas that we could do is because the work that you have done to make this a place that's already so exciting and has so many cool things going on. One of the things that I talked about in one of my meetings this morning was about research. And are there more? We're already doing some things where people students are doing research with professors in some pretty exciting ways. How can we leverage that even further to develop critical thinking, but also to create centers of expertise around particular topics or faculty or whatever it may be? There's a million other things we could do as well. So I'm going to open this up to questions, but before I do, let me first ask you a question, if I may. When you think about this, what, if any, of these things are exciting to you, and why?
I think the subscription model is interesting for our students, because our students are so overwhelmed and overworked in so many different areas of their lives that it allows them to take a break if they need to, and then come back. That it all be planned, so they don't have to suddenly start worrying about how to come back. Yeah. I just think that might be an interesting option for some of our students that are just really busy, and a four-year program.
It's just not realistic for them.
Yeah. And we lose.
Yeah, so again, could have impact on retention, although it wouldn't have impact on like 6-year retention. It would have actually lifelong retention impact. Other thoughts? Yeah.
The president's really focused on completion rates. So a lot of your ideas, though, make me wonder how some of those ideas would be approved in terms of completion.
Yeah, that's a legitimate concern, and
the answer is I don't know, but I think it's interesting to think about the possibilities, right? One is there could be some kind of incentive or structure or something put in place to try to supplement that. Yeah. Yep. No, and so one answer is that. Another answer is this idea won't work. Another answer is we redefine what completion rates mean, and we approach it in a different way, right? And so sometimes when you push and ask what's impossible, you find out this is impossible and we can't do it. But other times when you ask what's impossible, you find out actually if we do it this way and we do it this way, you can do it. So, yeah.
That side, though, if you're leading the school, though, there will be some allocation requirements. And so in choosing prioritization and allocation, how would that fit into thought?
by allocation you mean central administration.
Allocating budget to the school.
Yeah, so
And even within the school.
Because some would have more completion rates, the higher completion rates than others.
Or whatever it might be.
You have to say, this is more important than something else.
Yeah.
You would. And so I think the thing that I would do is go back, what's our vision, right? Are we changing the delta for students and embedding ourselves more in society? If it is doing that, and it's doing it better than it was before, then I go back and say, President, I want to renegotiate how we measure completion rates because I think we're accomplishing it more. And if we have measures that we can show it, then we negotiate it. If it's not, then we don't do it. We come up with some other idea that works better.
I like the idea of doing like micro grants or micro loans because how many students need just $100, $200? And money's out there. Like there's tons of people who would be willing to help. And UVU's got a huge alumni base that we're not tapped into. And, you know, but how many of those people would be willing to just donate $50 to help a student for even just, you know, one little time?
Yeah. In fact, on that note, my tour of the campus today was done by a young woman by the name of Kate, and she's an ambassador for the university. And one of the things she talked about was that Utah is #1 in the country for unused scholarship money, which is fascinating in and of itself. So we invited her to join us for lunch, and she talked to some of the other students there. And there was a student who was like, "What? Like, I even went to the scholarship department and they told me there was nothing for me." And she's like, "That's because you're asking the wrong questions." And she started coaching him. You might not even need to get donors to do something like that if there's #1 in the nation in unused scholarship funds, right? What we need is a smarter way to inform students about how to get money that's already out there. One of the things is that what if our information was more centralized for our students? What if we actually created, here's all the resources, and then the conversation turned to other things. It wasn't just money, it was even just like events, ways to participate, ways to contribute. Every organization is doing their own, and the students get this cacophony of noise from a million different places. What if they had one place they could go to get their information for events, for contributing, for money, for whatever else? A, how much time would that save? And B, how much impact would that have even on things like students being able to succeed? Yeah.
I just love how collaborative it is, the approach. I think that we have, you know, oftentimes these things are like listening pianos and people want to grab the piano bench, right? Yet I think the approach of iteration is inclusive and it gives everybody that, you know, positive dissonance or whatever to get involved. And I think that's the spirit of what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Be inclusive, have students' opinion matter, get everybody at the stakeholders at the table.
Yeah. Yeah.
I keep going back to your
Case study and thinking how poorly that consultant negotiated his contract. He should have been getting a part of the savings, not $90,000. Has nothing to do with the rest of your presentation. You can't let it go. I can't let it go. It's 45 minutes. You're not going to sleep all night. No. As a former consultant, I think he left way too much on the table.
All right, thank you.
We appreciate that.
That's what we should focus.
Sorry, what now? Oh, yes, I wanted to actually comment on Ryan's inclusiveness. Sorry, that was very engaging and very distracting. Okay, so I think it's interesting. First of all, you know, supposedly we want to be about inclusion, right? So the question is, you know, how do we do this? And I think we should be asking these questions. In what ways can we include and really make a difference in that way? I also, I think it's interesting to think about that notion about where the solutions are. I probably shouldn't say this on video. Yeah, cover it up quick. So let me put it this way. I'll try to be as obtuse and abstract as I can in this situation. But in an organization I was recently working with, the organization was significantly had less money than they had budgeted to spend, and it was causing all kinds of problems. And so they were scrambling to solve it. And well, actually, the leader of the organization was scrambling to solve it and, just constantly reaching out to people. And I have been trying to figure out how to tell this person, don't solve it. Give it to the people. Let them solve it. If you're looking to just look at the profit and loss statement and figure out what you can slice, then you're just going to be killing the patient. But there's a million ways that the people in the organization could save a little more money this way and could earn a little bit more money this way and do that thing. If you actually told them, transparently showed them the budget problem, told them the impact it would have and the impact we could have, and then say, what can you do to help me? And there would be so many ideas. And then you could actually go focus on strategy, which is what you should be doing anyway, right? And so there's so many ways to include, right? And when we talk about inclusiveness, we often are referring to that in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, which we absolutely should do. But there's a million other ways that inclusiveness is created. And part of it is just in allowing people to contribute to their full extent. And so I think that's a really important observation. Yeah.
Another 2 questions.
Please. Oh, wait.
There's no quotas? The first one, I don't know. First one would be, what is your definition of inclusion? And then the second one would be, on just this last comment you made, if there were cuts that had to be made to the school, what is your approach? Do you make horizontal cuts or vertical cuts?
So first one, my definition of inclusion is that everyone feels valued for who they are, including the things that are most unique and different about them, no matter who you are. People feel valued. That's what inclusion is. I belong here, and I'm a part of things, and it doesn't matter, race or gender or any other demographic category. What does matter is if I'm black and I need to be acknowledged as a black person, don't turn colorblind to me. Acknowledge me for who I am, right? Whatever that is. But if I'm a white male and I'm pretty much the standard definition of not in the typical diverse categories, I still need to be valued and included and belong and whatever else. And so to me, that's what I would say about inclusion is everyone is valued and feels valued for whatever is unique about them, even if it's something that might not normally be valued in this context. Now that doesn't mean inclusion doesn't mean that we can't be discriminating. We should never discriminate, but we should be discriminating in the sense of we have standards. So even though we value you and include you, if you don't meet the performance standards of the organization, that doesn't mean you get a free pass. Or as President Tuminez would say, we're not just about exceptional care, we're also about exceptional accountability and exceptional achievement. I was going to say performance, achievement. And so inclusion does not mean that we don't hold people to standards. The second question, in terms of cuts, it's hard for me to answer that question because I think it depends on the situation, right? And so there's sometimes when you have no choice but just to do big cuts and you've tried everything else and there's nothing left and you have to do it in some way. Generally, if cuts have to be made, my favor is surgical cuts. Where can we save? What are the things that we can do to make a difference that are going to do the least amount of damage to the organization and the individuals in the organization? And that is going to vary depending on the situation. So if you want to give me more specifics, I can try to give.
Like 5% across the board, everyone's budget gets cut by 5%, or we're going to take this department and it's gone. And that way everyone else will still have what they have.
I hope we never have to make that decision, but if,
will sometimes.
well, yeah. Generally speaking, my inclination would be towards equitable ones, unless, let's say there's a department that just simply isn't performing, the world has moved on and they don't need X anymore, then you may have to get rid of, so again, it depends on the situation, right? But if you're not in that situation where there's not some department that's not relevant or not producing or whatever else, then you'd probably go for the more equitable approach. At least I would. But again, I think the devil's in the details with those things. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so I think what you have there is your vision for us. Is that correct?
That is actually the UVU vision.
Okay, so what is the vision that you have for us that hides all these ideas that you have, that you just mentioned to us?
Yeah, so I would like to see the Woodbury School of Business have the highest delta in the country for student impact, that lives are transformed. Back, you might remember in 2004, I think it was, President George W. Bush, did the No Child Left Behind Act. And the idea was they started measuring all of the public schools in the country based on their the students' test performance at the end of the year. And it really was kind of a messed up measure, because if you come from a rich, white, suburban area where, the school district is, well off and parents have had education and whatever else, the end of the year is just a reflection of the natural growth of the beginning of the year. And so there was at least one organization, probably more than one, that came along and created value-added measures, where they did the simple thing of giving students tests at the beginning of the year and the end of the year, and then measured the delta and saw what changed. And it turned out that the people that looked like high performers were no longer high performers. Not just people, schools, districts that looked like they were high performers no longer were. And some people who had been buried and looked like they were low performers were actually extraordinary performers. I think there's a lot of the No Child Left Behind Act kind of measures in business schools. And so I would like to see us lead the country in the delta in terms of the impact we're having. I would like us, let's say at the end of 5 years, to not only lead that, but also to have the organizational capability to succeed no matter what area of business is relevant for Utah to succeed in those ways. So that may be that we have to get really good at online, or we may decide actually it's more of a hybrid of online or not online. It may be, but there's no data on the future, so that means there needs to be experimentation and figure out what's gonna work, what's not gonna work, and do that in real time. I would like to see us launch some of the projects, the products that we have into the stratosphere. So this one actually was President Toomey knows. She asked me, what do you want to see happen in 5 years? And so I gave her a few answers, and I hope they were good. But then when she was done, she said, what questions do you have for me? And I said, what do you want to see the Woodbury School business do in 5 years? And she talked a lot about fundraising and that we need to get these programs up. I don't know if this is where being an outsider doesn't help things. But she talked about the Entrepreneurship Center, and that should be named, and that should be better funded, and that should have, have all this kind of impact and, whatever else. And I was like, well, then let's get it. Let's get the funding and take it to a whole new level. I don't even know what level it's at, but, any level we're at, we can take to a higher level. So let's do it, right? And so if that's true about that center, there's probably things we can do with other centers. It's I'm sure Mitch would love if we found more money for the marketing centers that he was telling me about last night, right? And so I think that there's a lot of ways we could become even better funded, and then take whatever program we do it for to a new level. In terms of the biggest thing, I would like to see us measurably changing the Utah economy and measurably changing the delta of our students. And until we have those measures, I don't know what the targets should be that are accompanied with those measures. But because I'm an outsider, if I were to get this job, then the first thing I would do when I came in is listen. Go meet with faculty and hear what they think it should be. Go meet with administrators and think what they should be. Go meet with the staff, the donors, the students, the whoever else. And then once I have a better view of what's inside, the insider's view of the organization, then I could come and say, all right, based on what I've heard, here's what I think the measures should be for changing the delta and for improving the Utah economy because of the impact that the Woodbury School is having. Is that?
Talking about the Utah Valley economy, or talking about the...
I think I would measure it differently in each. So the primary focus is the local Utah Valley economy, but the fact is the better we do, the more people are going to want that impact to go elsewhere as well. And so you could look at the Utah economy as well. I just think you would have less ambitious goals with the whole Utah economy than you would with Utah Valley. Then you can help me make measures. Yeah.
So speaking of the Entrepreneurship Institute, how do you envision entrepreneurship as being part of the business school in general? For currently we have a minor instead of a major, so that students can focus on a major in another department and still get an entrepreneurship, either minor or certificate. And then we also have the Entrepreneurship Institute, which is a non-academic program that provides resources and workshops and things like that.
So honestly, I only learned about the Entrepreneurship Center recently, so I can spitball this, but I don't have a great answer, I'm going to tell you right now. But my impression is that the Entrepreneurship Center is already doing some pretty cool things. My son, I have a daughter who went to BYU before her mission, or went to UVU before her mission, and a son who's at BYU right now. And he actually thought he was going to do entrepreneurship at first. So he was working on this business, and he ended up coming over to the UVU Entrepreneurship Institute to get some help one day. And so, I think that, the fact that that was even possible says something pretty cool about the place. But in terms of that, I think there's a million things that could be done, and some of them you may already be doing, right? So how are we embedded with the entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial associations that already exist in Utah Valley? Are there ways we can enrich those connections in some way? What are the funding opportunities that are provided through the Entrepreneurship Center? What if we view ourselves as entrepreneurial? So earlier I said, we need to actually experiment if we're going to figure out what the future looks like for the Woodbury School of Business. Experimenting in business means, you go out and create minimally viable products and work with the customers to do that. Is the Entrepreneurship Center helping the Woodbury School to do minimally viable products to succeed in the marketplace? Is that something we could do? Again, I'm making this all up off the top of my head, but I don't see it. Entrepreneurship has taken off shockingly in Utah County and in Utah in general. And why wouldn't we take advantage of that in a million ways in the School of Business? So there's probably a better answer than that, but I'm going to claim ignorance for now. Yeah.
Piggybacking off that, at SoCon Slow Summit last week, the comment was made that a lot of these entrepreneurs take pride in the fact that they start college and then they get their idea going and they drop out, right? And that's kind of the way it is in the tech industry, specifically. But I think entrepreneurs as a whole kind of take this pride and, hey, we started college, but then I got this idea and I dropped out and did this and or seen success, whatever it is. How do we help those entrepreneurial students stay engaged in the university setting and provide the value that they need, that for whatever reason they're feeling like they're not getting in that sort of reason they're going out? How do we keep more students here to finish their school while starting ventures or being entrepreneurs or whatever?
Yeah. So I'm going to think out loud with you about that for a second. Is that okay? One of the tricky things about culture, because that's what you're describing, right, is there's an entrepreneurial culture and there's some heroism to dropping out of school to launch a successful business. So if that's correct, if that's a correct observation that that's a cultural issue, one of the things that's tricky about it is it's not a Woodbury School culture issue. It's at least nationwide, maybe worldwide cultural issue with entrepreneurship. So there's a few things to ask, right? One is, can you create an enclave where that's valued versus maybe we should encourage people to drop out, and if they're going to be successful, if we create an experience where they come back later. Something like that might mean the subscription model becomes more appealing because then, there is a reason and value in coming back later. Another thing we have to ask ourselves is, what's the value add? I have a friend who lives here in Utah County. He and I were best friends in college, roommates, or best friends in high school, roommates in college, and he dropped out of UVU in 1994 or 5, became an entrepreneur, and now he's multimillionaire. So the story worked for him. And I remember when he dropped out, he said, the only class I took that was useful to me was the business law class. And I thought, that's interesting, right? So one of the things to think about is, again, going back to clusters of classes that are practically useful in a specific place. Now, my guess is that probably wouldn't be true today because there's been so much more work done at UVU around making classes practical and giving people experience. But even if it's partially true, then do we know what kinds of things that if my friend were in this the program today and he said, I don't have time for all this school, I'm trying to build my business, what would be the value add? Would it be the business law? Would it be, employment law? He quickly discovered he didn't like having employees, and that caused all kinds of problems. Would it be actually, some kind of leadership class where it's talking about, what do you do when you're recruiting employees who don't have any incentive to work for you other than the money? How do we actually get them to stay? Are the things that we're doing really the value add? And are they the value add at the right time? So maybe they should drop out for a semester and then they come back for certain classes that are for certain things. Are we really meeting the needs of the constituents when we do that? That would be another way to approach the question. Maybe another way to do it is build better relationships with their parents, like we build relationships with the students' parents to help them encourage their kids to stay in school. Or who knows, right? Like I said, I'm thinking out loud right now. From a cultural perspective, can you actually say, what's the experience that's leading this? Can we create a different experience? So what if we create a cohort of entrepreneurs where we help them to see the value of staying in school, so it's their culture is different from the broader culture of entrepreneurship in the United States? Again, all of these are just ideas, but it's just trying to think about ways to approach that, because I don't know the answer. But I do believe that you put capable people together and you give them objective and you experiment and you can figure out and be successful.